Dan is directing a pop-up commercial when he briefly zones out during the take. The client isn't happy and wants the phone shown a bit higher. Dan argues it will only appear in a cutaway shot, but he agrees to do another take anyway. After the shoot, he greets his coworker Louise and mentions that he and his wife Lisa plan to visit his father's cabin that weekend. He adds that Lisa is also planning a long solo hike, even though he warned her it could be dangerous. Before leaving, he says goodbye to Louise and tells her he truly values their friendship. He later confirms plans to meet someone the next day at noon and tells them not to be late. Afterward, he visits his father Michael, a retired war veteran. Michael complains that his yogurt is too sweet and grumbles that the whole country is going to hell. Dan tells him about the cabin trip and Lisa's plan to go hiking alone. Michael questions whether Lisa is still with Dan and acts like Dan messed things up. Dan reassures him they're doing fine and explains the trip is meant to help them relax. Michael criticizes Dan's generation, saying they've had everything handed to them, cry when they don't get a trophy, and aren't ready to bleed for it. He adds that what they need is a good war. He says a man was made out of him, that men are not born but forged in a furnace of pain and suffering. He says he should have died in combat, not here, not like this, and even wishes a war upon Dan. Later, Dan drives home while secretly hiding duct tape, a saw, and rope in the trunk. He notices Lisa's friend Rachel nearby and greets her. He casually asks Lisa if she's ready for the hike. During the drive, Dan notices Lisa eating protein bars and tells her not to have too many because he wants to cook her dinner later. Sarcastically, she says she loves when he tells her what to do, then asks about his father. She says he loves her and is utterly embarrassed by his existence. Seeing a script in her hand, Dan asks if it's for the new play. Lisa nods and he assures her she'll get the part. She says she's not sure because the director is kind of a pretentious jerk, sort of part of the job description. Dan points out he directs films. Lisa says films can be art, then challenges whether Dan's films truly qualify. Dan argues he directed one film 8 years ago, but now he directs pop-up ads. He says his work paid off their visa bill, but Lisa fires back that he's the one who ran it up. She mocks supporting him and his noble theater work, noting it's not Broadway. She begs him to pretend to be happy for one weekend. Dan says he wasn't trying to insult her. He was trying to insult the director. Lisa tells Dan she thinks he's a great director. Moments later, they burst out laughing. They arrive at the cabin and Lisa asks Dan to carry the groceries inside. She takes the key hidden above the door and unlocks it. While Lisa pours herself a Dan heads down to the basement and opens a cabinet containing his father's shotguns before quietly shutting it again. He heads back upstairs and notices chips scattered across the floor, assuming mice made the mess. He later cleans the roof gutters before trying to start the lawnmower, but it doesn't start. Later, Lisa helps Dan prepare dinner. He asks if she's seen his favorite sweater, the winter one, blue with decorative snowflakes. Lisa shakes her head. Dan advises her not to crush the garlic, insisting it needs to be sliced since he's following the recipe exactly. Lisa mocks him, but Dan says he's only trying to make the evening special for her. She argues that if he's yelling about garlic, he's doing the opposite. He checks the steak and notes it feels too bendy, but Lisa, clearly fed up, snatches it from him and tosses it into the pan, which irritates Dan. That evening, Dan asks how the steak is. Lisa replies that it is good. Dan proudly reveals that he ordered the peppercorns all the way from Ohio 2 weeks earlier because he wanted the meal to be special. Confused, Lisa asks why. Dan says he simply wanted to cook her favorite meal, but Lisa points out that steak is not actually her favorite food. She notes he eats steak all the time. Lisa admits that while she likes steak, her real favorite dish is ceviche. Dan laughs and says he has never once seen her order or eat ceviche at a restaurant. Lisa explains that she only orders it if the restaurant knows how to make it properly, usually Peruvian or any South American place. She mentions Dario, the swarthy guy from Dan's acting class, and asks if he's from Peru. Lisa asks what that has to do with anything, but Dan simply shrugs and says he was just changing the subject. Later that night, the two play Scrabble, but Lisa grows frustrated as Dan keeps using words that seem completely made up. He insists that ZE is an officially accepted Scrabble word, but she calls it junk and asks what quin even means. Dan says he doesn't have to know what it means and that's not the rules. Lisa says it's no fun. If he quins on her, she loses some. Dan smiles and tells her to loosen up, reminding her that they used to mess around like this all the time. However, Lisa has had enough and says she's going to bed. The next morning, Dan gathers several heavy stones, and stuffs them into a duffel bag before loading it onto the boat. He then removes the supplies from his car, pours chloroform onto a rag, and takes a swig of whiskey to steady his nerves. While Lisa is distracted rehearsing her script, Dan slowly approaches her from behind. Lisa suddenly turns, questions what gives him the right, and ties him to a chair. She greets him with "wakey wakey." Looking down at himself, Dan, shocked, asks if she pissed on him. Lisa tells him that he actually pissed himself. He casually asks what the liquid is for, and Dan quickly lies, claiming it's just a cleaning supply. Lisa smells it and remarks that it's pretty strong. She then asks about the rest of the supplies. Dan nervously stammers that they're for fixing up the cabin because the place is falling apart. She asks about the rocks in the boat and what they're for. Dan says he was collecting them first. Lisa says she saw him and calls him a dumbass. While Lisa steps away for a moment, Dan desperately tries to grab the saw with his mouth, but only the handle comes off. Moments later, Lisa returns holding a shotgun. Dan pleads with her to calm down, saying she doesn't even know how to use that thing. In response, Lisa confidently points it directly at him. She says she thinks he was going to knock her unconscious, strangle her with that, take her out to the boat, tie her to the bag of rocks he hid there, and sink her to the bottom of the lake. She tells him that the only thing she does not understand is why he needed the saw. Dan quietly admits that bodies can float. Lisa scoffs at the idea, pointing out that he cannot even touch raw meat. She then asks what his plan was afterward, whether he intended to tell everyone that she simply wandered off into the woods. She calls his plan stupid and demands to know why he was planning to kill her. Dan quietly replies that he saw her. Lisa asks when he found out. Dan says he saw her. She gives him a tip. If you don't want to get caught cheating, don't sleep with a Peruvian at a party that your husband is also at. Surprised, Lisa asks Dan if he really planned to kill her just because she slept with someone else. She points out that he hasn't touched her in 2 years, and the last time they tried, they couldn't even finish. Dan fires back, saying it's because she constantly criticizes him and makes him feel small. He admits he already feels that way every day he wakes up. Everything sounds so mean in her stupid accent, like British crossed with the devil. He wanted a wife, not to be married to his mother. Lisa snaps, yelling that she wanted a man, not a 40-year-old toddler. She admits she married him because he seemed responsible and was 10 years older, but now she bitterly realizes she's stuck with a giant baby. Then she tells him his plan is terrible. Hers, on the other hand, is excellent. Confused, Dan asks what her plan was. Not was bloody is. The story flashes back to the previous day. Lisa is having coffee with her friend Rachel. She complains about how much she hates hunting, but Dan has been begging her to go with him, calling it a bonding experience. She adds that she doesn't even like guns. Suddenly, Henry, one of Dan's friends, startles them. He tells Lisa he's finished cleaning the leaves. She smiles and says she'll pay him via PayPal. She explains to Rachel that Henry went to high school with Dan and later to prison. Rachel asks why Lisa would ever want to move out when the house looks so beautiful, but Lisa simply says it's time for a change. She says everyone knows how much she hates guns, and scoffs, asking if Lisa's big plan was just to shoot him, calling it screwed up. She reminds him that he literally just tried to kill her. He argues that he was nice about it, even cooking her a lovely meal. He adds that she wouldn't have felt anything because she would have been unconscious, and that the only sensation she would have experienced was euphoria, saying he researched it because he is considerate, unlike her. She sarcastically asks if they should renew their vows. Dan smirks and says her plan never would have worked anyway because she's a terrible actress. He claims the police would see exactly what he's seen for the past 7 years. Lisa pretending to care. They both try to force tears, but Dan manages it first. In response, Lisa strikes him with the butt of a shotgun. As she prepares to shoot him, Henry suddenly appears behind her. Dan signals to Henry, saying it's hammer time. Henry looks confused. Dan clarifies, telling him to hit her with a hammer, then apologizes for being unclear. The story then flashes back to 5 days earlier. Dan goes over the details of killing Lisa with Henry. He explains that he will handle the killing and Henry will take care of disposing the body. Dan mentions the insurance is for $100,000 and Henry will get half. Henry pauses and asks for the deal in writing, questioning whether he wants a written document on how they're going to kill Dan's wife. Back in the present, Dan tells Lisa not to waste her strength trying to rip the tape because it is too strong, but she manages to peel it off. Lisa snaps at Dan, saying he does not even have the balls to kill her himself. Henry, offended on Dan's behalf, argues that he is the one actually doing the killing, so he clearly has the balls, and that he is only helping with the second part because blood makes Dan uncomfortable. Dan tells him to stop talking. Then he turns to Lisa and asks what possible reason she could have for wanting to kill him. Lisa says she knew it, that he can't even think of a single reason. She calls him controlling, weak, and insecure. She says he pushed her to quit her job where she was making real money so she could focus on acting, and he didn't even help her do that. He didn't even give her a tiny role in his movie. She says he lost all their money, lost the car, lost the house, lost everything. All she wanted was to be loved and supported, but instead he screwed both of their futures up. She bitterly says that even if she gets a divorce, she will never escape the debt. And says that's why they're killing her. Henry casually mentions that he's getting half 50,000 and plans to buy an RV. Dan tells Henry to shut up, saying the policy is for 100,000. Henry calmly tells Dan to remove the bag. Gasping for air, Lisa reveals that the policy is actually worth 1 million. Shocked, Henry demands to know why Dan lied to him. Lisa cuts in, offering Henry half the money if he kills Dan instead. Dan quickly matches the offer, but Lisa ups the stakes, promising him the entire amount. Dan insists she's lying, but Lisa pushes further, adding that she'll set Henry up with Rachel. While Henry is distracted, Dan suddenly lunges for the rifle, and a struggle breaks out. He manages to grab it, but Lisa refuses to let go. In the chaos, the gun goes off, killing Henry. Lisa panics and demands to know why Dan shot him. Dan insists it was her fault, but she fires back, pointing out that his finger was on the trigger. Dan then raises the gun at her and Lisa bolts. She hurls a knife at him, but when he tries to shoot, the gun is out of pellets. As he starts to reload, Lisa suddenly drives the knife into his foot and grabs the gun. Dan recovers quickly and lunges to take it back, but she breaks free and runs. He chases her down and tackles her to the ground. They struggle over the gun and it fires into the attic. A man screams from above and moments later, 3 bodies come crashing down. The story then flashes back to 3 days earlier. A prison guard named Algra is in love with an inmate named Pete. Because of this, she helps him and his friend Todd escape from the correctional facility. While on the run, they come across the cabin and decide to take shelter. Todd tries to break in with a rock, but Pete checks the usual hiding places for a key and finds one. Once inside, they start eating snacks and drinking, quickly making themselves comfortable. The next morning, Pete tells the others that they need to lie low since the police are most likely already searching for them. Todd complains that Dan's clothes are terrible, but Algra says she actually likes them. Suddenly, they hear a car pull up outside. Algra gestures for everyone to move into the attic and hide. Before heading up, Pete yanks the tablecloth, food and all, then grabs a knife. Night falls and Algra quietly asks Pete why they can't just kill Dan and Lisa. He tells her to be patient. After a while, she says she needs to relieve herself and Todd hands her a can. As time drags on, Algra starts whining that she's bored. Pete tells her to deal with it, but she suggests playing charades instead. She acts out a movie. Todd guesses the movie is her favorite. A few minutes later, Pete notices a man outside and quietly tells the others to keep their voices down. Just as Todd guesses the movie Algra is acting out, Dan suddenly fires into the attic, the floor gives way, and all 3 crash down into the room below. Pete casually takes a bite of the steak and remarks that it's delicious, noting the pepper from Ohio. He then asks who they are. Pete introduces himself and the others, adding that he won't ask for their names because he finds it easier not to humanize people. He suggests calling them Ron and Hermione. He says it seems like they have marital issues and asks why they killed the man. Lisa immediately blames Dan, but Dan insists that they are both responsible. Pete orders them to stop talking and demands to know what they want. He reveals that he and Todd were wards of the state. Algra cuts in saying she and Pete are in love. She adds that she was a correctional officer and helped him escape because they're in love. Pete then explains that their plan has run into a liquidity problem and that they need cash. Dan tells him his wallet is upstairs. They say they already checked the wallet and purse and found $53. Lisa says there is 200 hidden in a ceramic pot in the office, but Pete shakes his head and says that is not enough. Dan finally admits they're broke. Pete doesn't believe him, but Lisa confirms it, saying Dan only pretends to be wealthy. Dan argues that maintaining appearances is important in his line of work. Pete can't believe they spent their last dime on special pepper. Algra steps forward and tells Pete she'll handle it. She instructs Todd to draw a circle on the floor, then cuts Dan's bindings. Algra casually explains that working night shifts in prison used to be boring, so she and a few guards came up with a fun game. They would take a couple of inmates from their cells, bring them down to the laundry room, and put them inside a large circle drawn on the floor to see who could walk through first. The winner gets a pack of cigarettes while the loser gets watched. Pete tells him that if he doesn't want to play, he should just tell them where the money is. Dan pleads and repeatedly says no, that they don't have any money. Algra says he has a fighting chance because he's taller, and Todd now has a handicap because Dan shot her in the ass. In a sudden burst of desperation, Dan breaks free from Todd's grip, stumbles out of the circle, and runs. He begs them to let him go, promising to do anything as he breaks down in tears. Just as Todd is about to act, Pete suddenly stops him. He notices a movie poster and asks if Dan is just a big fan or something. Shaken and out of breath, Dan reveals that he directed it. Surprised, Pete says he loves that movie. Dan asks if he saw it in theaters. Pete shakes his head, saying he watched it in prison during movie night. Pete then questions why Dan spared the hero when he should have sacrificed himself. Dan explains that the producers wanted a happy ending. Pete points out that it's Dan's movie, not theirs. Dan agrees. Pete praises him, saying he has a real voice, and then asks Todd to continue. But Todd can't get himself aroused, so Algar decides to kill him. Before pulling the trigger, she tells him to say goodbye to his wife. Lisa intervenes, saying she has $50,000 she's been setting aside. There's a bank in town. When it opens, they can have all of it. Just don't touch them. Later, Algra removes the pellet from Todd's backside. Meanwhile, Lisa regains consciousness and asks Dan how they ended up here. She wistfully says that when they first found each other, she thought they would be a team taking on the world together, but somewhere along the way, things turned ugly. She admits she wanted to get caught cheating with Dario because she wanted Dan to fight for their relationship. She apologizes, then says it doesn't matter since they're going to be killed anyway. Dan notices a billiard ball and manages to retrieve it. Upstairs, Pete explains the plan. They will take Lisa to the bank with Dan locked in the trunk. Once they get the money, they'll kill them both, put their bodies in the car, and ditch it. Algra asks why they should ditch a car that helped them. Because it's a Volvo, Pete replies dryly. He says if you get rid of that automobile like it's trash, you better be careful that it doesn't come back and burn your dick off. From below, Dan shouts. Pete tells Todd to check it out while he goes to apologize to Algra. Todd heads down to the basement with a shotgun. Dan quickly says he needs to use the bathroom. Todd checks with Pete, who approves. Before cutting Dan loose, Todd warns him not to try anything. Todd first checks the bathroom for anything that could be used as a weapon, removes the toilet lid, and then gestures for Dan to go in. He then approaches Lisa, who sharply tells him not to touch her. He assures her he isn't. Moments later, Dan comes out with a sock containing the billiard ball and knocks Todd unconscious. He tells Lisa to stay quiet and leaves her tied up. Dan sneaks upstairs while Lisa begins cutting herself free. She eventually makes her way upstairs as well. Pete calls out to Todd, and when there's no response, he goes to check and finds him unconscious. Lisa slips out of the cabin and hides. She can't be far. Todd takes the road while Pete takes the forest. Once they're out of sight, Lisa slips back into the cabin. Meanwhile, Todd realizes his flashlight is dead and heads inside. Just as Lisa grabs the boat key, Todd catches her and orders her to drop it. He takes the key from her. He coldly replies that it was over the moment they hit him on the head. She then pleads, saying she's pregnant, but Todd doesn't believe her. He argues that if it were true, she would have said it earlier. Lisa explains that she had an affair and didn't want to reveal it in front of Dan. She begs him, saying the baby has done nothing wrong. Todd nods, saying he won't shoot her in the stomach. Suddenly, Dan tackles him from behind. Just as Todd is about to overpower Dan, Lisa jumps in and bites off part of Todd's ear. Enraged, he turns on her. A brutal fight follows. Hearing Pete approaching, Lisa asks Dan to grab the boat key from Todd and they run upstairs. They hide in a closet. Dan admits that when their relationship began to fall apart, he got scared and didn't know how to fix things, so he gave up. He apologizes and tells Lisa he isn't angry about the pregnancy, but excited. She confesses she lied just to stall Todd. Impressed, Dan says he believed her and that she was convincing. He gives her the boat key and tells her to run while he distracts them. Dan bursts out of the closet and attacks Pete. In the struggle, Pete accidentally fires his gun, hitting the ceiling and knocking down the can filled with Algar's urine. Outside, Algar tackles Lisa, but Dan arrives just in time to save her. Pete crashes through a window, startling them both. Lisa grabs a rake and attacks Pete. As she backs away, she's horrified to see Todd still alive. Calm and unfazed, Pete remarks that he's killed people in many ways and that eventually it all becomes boring, just like a relationship. The key, he says, is to keep things fresh. He adds that he's never killed someone with a lawnmower. Just then, they hear a car approaching. Pete steps out to check and the car suddenly runs him over. The driver steps out. It's Michael, who angrily asks who broke his cabin window. The story flashes back to 6 hours earlier. One of Michael's friends notices the broken window and informs him. Michael immediately decides to investigate, but his caretaker tries to stop him. Michael punches him, takes his car keys, and heads to the cabin. Back in the present, Michael casually asks Dan who these idiots are. He grabs the shotgun and shoots Todd. As he's about to shoot Pete, Algra stabs him with a knife. Michael shoots her in the foot. Pete then mockingly asks if the old man is going to die. Michael shakes his head and replies that he's going to eat his nose. He then tells Dan and Lisa to get into the car. Pete kills Michael using the lawnmower. Lisa manages to drive the car away, but Pete shoots at them from a distance. Dan wakes Lisa up. She quickly realizes that Pete's shot grazed her, cutting off some of her hair. Dan reassures her that she's fine and tells her they need to stay focused. He says he needs her to get to the boat. She asks where he's going. He says he has to go take care of something. He doesn't want to lie to her ever again and wants to start communicating honestly. He says the whole side of her head looks terrible and like a total nightmare, but he appreciates what she's trying to do and says now is not the time. Meanwhile, Algar begs Pete for help, but he coldly tells her he's breaking up with her. Lisa runs toward the boat. Algar limps back into the cabin, using alcohol and cloth to treat her badly wounded foot. Just as she finishes, Dan appears and crushes her injured foot under his boot. She begs for mercy, claiming she was manipulated by Pete. When he remains unmoved, she taunts him, calling him a coward and daring him to shoot a police officer. Dan doesn't hesitate, he shots her. Outside, just as Lisa starts the boat, Pete finds her. Dan hears Lisa shouting his name and runs, but he's too late. He grabs the rope and dives into the river. Lisa spots him and, trying to distract Pete, asks where his girlfriend is. He says technically they broke up and she was a lot. Dan attacks Pete, but Pete quickly gains the upper hand. Dan swings and misses. Lisa claws at Pete's face, but he effortlessly knocks her down. Lisa fires a flare gun, but misses. Pete laughs, saying the two of them deserve each other. He then tells Dan he's going to do what he's been too afraid to do: kill his wife. Dan orders him to stay away from his wife, then suddenly begins to vomit. Pete lunges in and wraps the boat rope around his neck, strangling him. Lisa uses the handle of a duffel bag to choke Pete. Together, they overpower him and push him into the water. As Pete sinks, the remaining rope snags around Dan's foot, pulling him under with him. Dan tells Lisa to let him go, but she refuses and pulls him back up. Later, Dan tells her the police will come soon. Lisa hands him his severed fingers. He quietly thanks her and apologizes for trying to kill her. She apologizes for trying to kill him too. After a moment, Dan looks at her and asks what now. They're right back where they started, still broke, still with all their problems to deal with. He says let's deal with it, but specifically how. She says she got an idea. In a later staged interview, they tell authorities what happened in there. They say they don't even know if there's such a group of very angry people. The interviewer says they must have been terrified and asks how they survived. Lisa answers in one word: love. Hollywood is making this story into a movie. They confirm it's true and say they're finally going to get to make a film together.